Hey everyone, it's Chris Hetherington. I went to Yale University and I grew up in North Branford, Connecticut.
What's your favorite word that describes football?
Teamwork. I think football is the ultimate team sport. Everything has to come together from every individual player to execute and be successful in football. Ultimate team sport for sure.
What's a word or phrase in football that you could do without?
In today's world, in college, it's portal. I think the portal although has some benefits for players, I think is tough. I mean, you think about football and teamwork and community and culture. I think it's tough in today's world in college football when your teammates are gone and they're here one day and gone the next, and chasing opportunity, chasing money. Well, I'm in favor of college football players getting paid, but the portal is very challenging.
What moment in your football career gave you the biggest rush?
Man, coming out of the tunnel, my first play ever in the NFL was on Thursday Night Football when I was the up back in the kickoff team, and the kicker shanked it, and I received the kick, and that was my kind of welcome to the NFL.
Do you remember that anything about it? Was it like just a blur?
I remember I was supposed to be in the wedge, and so I caught the ball probably on, I don't know, 7 yard line, 10 yard line, and ducked behind the wedge. Saw nothing but green grass, thought I was gone, and got blasted from the side. But 23 yards for my first play wasn't a
That's
bad
pretty good.
ball. Yeah.
That's pretty good. Freaking. So that's a good one. Besides the portal, what's the one thing about the game today that frustrates you the most?
There's been a lot of rule changes, right? They're trying to protect the players, which I agree with, but I think some of the rules are specifically around the quarterback and receivers coming across the middle. I mean, the game is a violent game, right? It's a very physical game, and there's going to be situations where guys are at risk of getting injury, but I just don't want the core dynamic, if that makes sense, of the game to change, right? We've all heard about rule changes, and certainly I think they would do a better job, Rob, of protecting the players. There was no concussion protocol when I played, and that's really important. They're doing a better job of that now. But I think some of the rule changes are affecting the great game we know.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right. So, what's the best piece of advice, unfiltered advice you ever received? So, from a coach, from a parent?
It's very simple one day. Make shit happen. You got to grind. Nothing is given to you. You got to earn everything. I've always been a grinder my whole life, my whole career. You got to create opportunities and you got to work for it. So that best advice I've gotten.
How about the sound? What's that sound? I always used to think it was the band warming up as you're walking out, but what's that sound that brings you back to those days?
The roar of the crowd. I mean, there's nothing like I said, coming out of the tunnel on game day and that roar of the crowd, or a big play happens and there's that roar of the crowd, or you're playing against Kansas City and the Chiefs, and they're doing the national anthem and they're like the home of the Chiefs. Like it's just
Mhm.
those sounds just ring in my head all the time. It's great, great memories.
How about smell? Smell or taste that brings you back? I used to say it was green Gatorade for me, but what's a smell or taste?
The grass. I remember, training camp, early morning, dewy out, and you could just smell the natural grass. It was awesome. And my sons play football, flag football now, and so it's weird. I noticed the smell of the natural green grass. Obviously, there's a lot of artificial turf now, and the turf is a lot better. I was playing on concrete back in the day, but undoubtedly the smell. The other smell that comes to mind is the smelling salt. I mean, I must have used smelling salt hundreds of times in the NFL. It's pretty crazy smell.
Put yourself back at Yale. And if you were a student athlete, knowing what you know now with the NIL, you get the permission to go out there and explore that career path in solopreneurship or entrepreneurship. What would you have started? Like as a student athlete, what if you had to start a business, what would it be?
I think the key in any business is finding where there are gaps in the market. I think there's a lot of opportunities that have evolved in sports marketing. I think that's a really interesting space. Talent rep is a really interesting space. Look, I feel blessed and lucky to be back in sports again, Rob. I mean, obviously sports were a big part of my life, and now, as the owner and CEO of Fathead, being back in sports and that culture is just amazing. So I obviously went to Yale. A lot of my buddies went into finance and Wall Street, and that was kind of the expected path. And I look back in my career, although I'm very grateful for my path and learned a lot, worked for a hedge fund for 11 years, and have, been a four-time CEO. But it's identifying opportunities or gaps in sports and marketing that I think are interesting in today's world. Obviously, AI is everywhere. I wish I invented AI back in the day.
You and me both. Who had the biggest impact on your life outside of football?
My parents, now that I'm a sports dad, just understanding the commitment and the time and being an Uber driver for these kids is, my parents have undoubtedly been the greatest influence in my life. My brother's 10 years older, went to Princeton. So he's looked up to my brother, had a very successful career in finance as a private wealth in Merrill Lynch. Sister's been an incredible friend to me, an ally and supporter of me. So nothing better than family. I think, my family dynamic has been great my whole life.
And knowing when we were younger and couldn't wait for that Walter Camp weekend because it was all over the press and news. And certainly when you get into college and high school, and what was it about Walter Camp, and what do you think it really means to the city of New Haven and just the state of Connecticut? What's your fondest memory of that time?
I've always been a huge fan of Walter Camp. I mean, Walter Camp as a young athlete in Connecticut was huge. It was an incredible weekend. It was an incredible honor for the college athletes to get that experience. And, when I got to go through that experience at Yale as a Connecticut player was amazing, man. I remember, getting my tux at Men's Warehouse and reflecting back, I remember specifically being on the bus ride over to the dinner that night and the ceremony or whatever. And thinking back to some of those guys that were on the bus, including some of them became my teammates. I remember Todd Sauerbrunn, who ended up being a teammate of mine in Carolina as a punter. He was call it overserved from the night before and really struggled to get to the dinner that night. And I remember Joe Paterno was the headline guy that year, and I remember Todd was so hungover, man. He battled to get to the dinner. And then I remember his speech. He was positioning himself as an athlete, not a kicker or a punter. He's like, I was an All-American lacrosse player, and so just thinking back to those memories and one, pretty surreal for me for growing up in the area, admiring Walter Camp and that whole experience and how big it was, and then being blessed and grateful to be a part of that was an amazing experience. And we talk about all the time. I'd love to be a part of bringing Walter Camp back to new heights in a big way.
I don't think you're getting your tuxes at Men's Warehouse anymore.
No, I'm actually getting a new tux. My house burned down, including my tux, so I gotta get a new one. Yeah, I'm not getting anything off the rack.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.